Now,
So we've got...
am a longtime Goblins fan, so this is a treat
I've
for
heard.
me. This is difficult, though. So I'm a longtime Goblins fan, so part of me is rooting for Teo Moutier, because I love a Goblins deck and been playing Goblins for like a decade, excuse me. But there's also a pretty big part of me that's a Seth Manfield fan. So I don't really know what to do here. I'm a little conflicted.
Well, he's a Hall of Famer, so I feel like cheering for him is never the wrong thing to do.
You can only go so wrong rooting for Seth Manfield. And Thoughtseize is never a bad place to start.
Seth here, he's starting out with a Thoughtseize off this black mana. Did not shock in the Overgrown Tomb on first turn. That is because your life total is very relevant against goblins. Just one extra goblin could take you out.
It's an interesting thing. Thoughtseize in this matchup, it's a combination of things. One is life total, and two also is Goblins doesn't have a lot to do on the first turn of the game. So if you're playing against like a hyper-aggressive deck, Seth might want to fire off that Thoughtseize on turn 1, but realistically, the only play that Goblins has to make on turn 1 is Squirrel Prospector, which is good, but being able to slow them down on turn 2 by taking a Conspicuous Snoop or maybe a Wily Goblin if their hand isn't that strong, there's some appeal to that. So that play makes some sense.
We're going to see Uro coming down here, drawing a card, and Fabled Passage getting put into the battlefield. That, of course, going to be cracked, I believe, for Thoughtseize mana.
Seth's hand, Teo's hand right now, I don't want to call it Thoughtseize proof, but it's a good hand, and Thoughtseize isn't going to really poke that big of a hole in this hand. If you take a Chieftain, there's still a War Chief left over. If you take a Krinko, well, there's still plenty of 3-mana spells to be played. So right now, taking a look at Teo's hand, I'm going to call it Thoughtseize proof in quotes, insofar as it isn't like this super devastating Thoughtseize right now.
And we're seeing Krenko get thrown to the graveyard and the 2 haste enablers staying in hand. Those 2 haste enablers are great. One of them is +1/+1 to all your goblins on the field, and the other one reduces the costs of your other goblins, which could make many goblins coming down a turn a real possibility in the future.
Well, what's interesting about this stage of the game, and we're still in the early stages, it's only the 3rd turn, but already if a War Chief comes down this turn, or Chieftain, depending on which one Tail wants to play, we're going to go with the War Chief and get some damage in here. Now Top Deck Muxus is very much online. Now, does Seth have the answer? Well, he's got multiples here in Pulse, Language, and Aether Gust. But things are getting scary for Seth already.
Yes, Seth does have these very slow reactionary spells in the Languish and the Maelstrom Pulse, able to remove either targets at the same name, or Languish pretty much clears the entire board. Aether Gust, though, able to hit the stack. If a Muxus gets cast, it's going straight back on top of the deck.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting spot right now. So let's just say that Moutier were to draw a Muxus, which this play is now certainly off the table because the War Chief is gone, but it was possible for it to be played and then Seth to gust it. Unfortunately here for Teo, there's some real flooding going on here. I mentioned a couple of turns ago how the hand wasn't particularly Thoughtseizable. Well, right now, Teo's just drawing a couple of lands, which is not ideal. Still has some pressure, but Seth's hand is lining up well here, especially if he draws a 5th land, which he kind of did.
Yeah, it's a 5th land, but it's going to come in untapped. Or tapped here. So when you say a hand is not particularly Thoughtseizable, do you mean that the hand is bad? Are those the same thing?
Well, it's kind of 2 different things, right? When we saw Seth fire off that second Thoughtseize, yes, taking Krenko is good. I would never say that it isn't, but it was a hand in which Teo still had plenty of plays in War Chief and Chieftain, and also had potential for a good draw step. So yes, you take a Krenko. Yes, that's a great card in this deck, but it's still a hand that Teo had plenty of action with. And you see here in this game, Teo is still kind of keeping on, still attacking, activating Castle Embereth, everything. So that Thoughtseize wasn't a, oh man, you took the wind out of my sails, I have nothing left to do. It was kind of a, this is annoying, but I still have cards to play.
Yep, and 3 damage is going to be coming through with the Wily Goblin still in the attack. Aether Gust, though, hitting the Chieftain, going to throw it back into hand, back on top of or bottom of the deck. I think right now, Teo is probably looking for something better than a Chieftain, by which I mean a Muxus.
Yeah, any match that you and I cover or any of our colleagues are going to cover when it involves goblins, we're going to be talking about Muxus a lot because duh. And the games kind of just center around that card. So one thing that Seth did on that particular turn is he's just trying to keep the battlefield kind of clear. He, at this stage, post-Thoughtseize, he actually doesn't know the contents of Teo's hand. So he's going to fire off the Gust. He wants to get Nissa established, does have a Languish as a backup plan, and can go to Uro this turn as well. So it looks like we're going to see the Elder Giant hit the battlefield.
Yes, Uro has entered the battlefield, got that card draw, land coming into play. Next turn, probably going to be Nissa, because this is an excellent setup. You've got this big 6/6 on the battlefield, very good at defending unless Muxus really, really devastates the board here. And it's always going to be a roll of the dice. So let's see what Muxus hits. It is a Chieftain, which is a haste enabler, and a Gem Palm Incinerator. Not the most threatening Muxus pull, but enough that Muxus himself during this attack, because he's going to be buffed, will be pretty scary.
Yeah, so this, we're spinning the RNG wheel there with Mux. It's always an exciting thing to be seen. And this isn't the best Muxus that we're going to see over the course of this tournament, maybe not even in this game or match, but this is good enough. And the reason why is because take a look at the Muxus now. It's an 8/8. So if we let this Muxus through and we block a Chieftain, Seth is going to die. He's going to take exactly lethal. However, as we're going to see Uro block here, I don't think Seth is going to, well, Seth's certainly not going to die on this turn, but he's got to make it out of the next turn. Uro can assist with that, and so can Languish. So this could have been really bad news for Seth. It's still pretty bad because he's all the way down to 1.
I think a land draw is exactly what Seth needed here. That's going to allow for the Uro guaranteed into Languish. So you gain back a couple life, don't have to sit there at 1, which is a really scary place to be.
Yeah, I think step 1 here, as Seth did draw Swamp, is, he's probably going to start by attacking with Uro. Let's draw my card. Let's get my life. Let's get some information. Remember, Uro's got, well, plenty of triggers, but most importantly, one to put the land on the battlefield. So he's going to play the Forest. Now he's got the Swamp. We could see a Nissa into Languish. We can see multiple spells in this turn.
Yep, we're seeing that. I saw the careful tapping there. And the Zaggoth Triomes, those 3-colored lands, it is important to note that those are forests. So Nissa is generating 2 mana off each of those. We're going to see Languish taking out this slew of goblins. And then Nissa's going to animate a land. And I believe the other Uro might hit the battlefield just for that good life gain.
Yeah, potentially. It's a little bit interesting if Seth actually wants to play the Uro this turn or not, because should have the ability to.
A 3/3 blocker is pretty good. I feel like
I think you might want that.
That's smart. And of course, the War Chief sees the War Chief is going to give itself haste. That's a 2/2. And if there was something else that maybe its cost gets reduced and it's big enough, that would be excellent. But no, it looks like Teo did not get a very scary, hasty creature here. It's just going to be Goblin War Chief and Skirk Prospector in hand.
Remember, Seth, pretty fortunate to make it out of that last turn alive, I think I would say. Obviously, there's a much higher ceiling on Muxus that we saw the last turn, and now he's starting to take over the game. Goblin War Chief and Skirk Prospector, those are the follow-ups, but that's nothing too crazy for this Sultai deck to be able to handle. You mentioned that second Uro that's going to be it's going to be cast right now. May get escape this turn depending on how things do go, but Seth is starting to turn the tide on this game. And one thing to note here, Amy, is that this game can end very, very quickly just due to damage and how quickly these creatures can get the job done. And Essence Scatter being a huge draw here for Seth, cutting off Muxus as the top deck.
Teo is in top deck city, and you know what Goblins runs? It pretty much is just running creatures. Sure, it's got Thoughtseize in there, but with creatures, you know what's going to hit it? Essence Scatter. And there's Aether Gust as well on the draw from Uro. I think this game might be over.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. With Seth at 10, picking up a copy of Essence Scatter and Aether Gust, there's no good draw here for Teo. Mountain certainly is not going to do it. And for a turn where Seth needed to get a little bit lucky to make it out alive against that Muxus, things lined up beautifully for the former world champion. And I'm thinking he's going to be up a game here. We're going to move into game number 2 here in just a minute.
And there's a Disdainful Stroke really laying down the counter spells, and now it's going to be time for a big swing. These 3 Vigilant lands and Uro himself getting in lethal damage. And Teo, not the one to concede, just going to go into sideboarding after taking, wow, a lot of damage, going to -13.
You can see.
A little bit of overkill.
Yeah, to be sure. You can see at the end of that game for Seth's hand, you saw a second copy of Aether Gust because he played one earlier in the game, the Disdainful Stroke, and the Essence Scatter. Those are all nods towards Goblins and Muxus in particular. As weird as you and I will talk about, and everybody else that's doing this show, and for all you wonderful folks watching at home, we all know at this point that Muxus is the key card in Goblins. Yes, it can win without it, but it would prefer to draw and win with it. And Seth and Brad and the other players that are playing this Sultai deck, they have put an emphasis on, I got to stop that card. Now, Gust, Disdainful Stroke, and Essence Scatter, they're good against other stuff too, which is why they're playing them, but huge onus on saying, I got to contain Muxus. And if I can do that, I think I can win these games and matches. And Seth was able to do that just enough to win game one.
It feels like a callback to Standard just a couple months ago, where playing Aether Gust in your main was the best thing you could do. And right now, in this tournament, it was an excellent choice that this entire testing group made.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. You know, again, as I said at the top of the match, it's the kind of thing where you got to be sure that you're right, because if you peg the metagame wrong, which I will give to their credit, Seth and Brad, they don't do that often, which is getting it wrong. You can look pretty foolish with these main deck Gusts going up in Sultai Mirrors and other places. But if you think that Goblins is going to be a huge percentage of the metagame, and you're just trying to stall long enough to get your Uros and your Nissas online, Aether Gust is the perfect card. We saw it play a role there in game number one, and perhaps we'll see it again here in game number two.
Yep, they called it, they nailed it, and now it's time to see what these starts have in store. So we see Conspicuous Soup hitting the battlefield for Teo and a Thoughtseize on top. Seth, of course, has the ever-amazing Growth Spiral into Uro. That's going to be a very good ramping start. And with two Uros in hand, this is a Thoughtseize resistant hand. Of course, Nissa, a big threat, still can be removed. And the Eliminate, which is good single target removal against goblins, and Languish, a board wipe against them, other targets in hand.
Yeah, I mentioned last game how it was difficult to Thoughtseize Teo. Now, on the other side of things, it's difficult for Teo to Thoughtseize Seth for the reasons that you mentioned. Tough to poke a hole in this hand. You know, depending on what Teo is trying to accomplish, which I think in this game, so maybe play a little bit longer as you're going to see the War Chief and see some attacks here. But, you know, do you want to take a Languish? Do you want to take a Nissa? Do you want to take a single elimination spell, which now there's two of them because Heartless Act was just drawn? Now, that's a tough decision to be had here.
Fabled Passage, grabbing black mana, trying to get the black mana, the double black especially, for Languish set up as soon as possible. Heartless Act able to take out all of these counter-free goblins, and another Thoughtseize entering the hand here. I don't think this is going to be a Thoughtseize turn unless Uro ends up grabbing black mana.
Yeah, most notably, though, is Seth is going to miss his fourth land drop, and now he is tapped out, and this is an opportunity for Teo to pounce a little bit. Great turn for a
You should never have less lands than the Goblin player if you were on Sultai.
You would think, but here we are. Growth Spiral didn't find one. Uro didn't find one either. And now we may see Teo try to pounce and say, you know what? I'm going to dump some creatures in the battlefield. I'm going to try to get this game over with pretty quickly. Looks like we're going Wily Goblin here into Thoughtseize. Maybe we'll see some stuff after that. But if you're able to clear out just one sweeper, which you're going to see Languish hit the dust, you feel comfortable dumping your creatures in the battlefield and saying, not only now does Seth have to draw a sweeper, but he also needs to draw a fourth land for the sweeper, unless it's Witch's Vengeance.
And that is definitely not a sweeper. There's only a little bit of removal in the form of these single target things. We've got Aether Gust, Heartless Act, Eliminate. I could see this game being over with Goblins taking the win for the second match.
Well, you know, what's interesting about Goblins, as Seth is going to kind of try to navigate his turn and figure out how he can stay alive for a turn here. Looks like he's going to fire for Thoughtseize and take that Ringleader, maybe get a little information on his way out the door because he doesn't have any more black mana. But what's interesting about Goblins and what makes it such a compelling deck choice for this tournament, Amy, is that this deck is very good early, it's very good in the mid game, and it's very good late because of Muxus, but it can also play Muxus in the early game, the mid game, and the late game. So it's good at all stages of the game, and you may not think of Goblins as that aggressive of a deck, but look how it's attacking the life total right now after Seth missed the land drop.
A lot of people consider this to be a combo deck. It's really not. It's an aggro deck that has a combo in it. I know some people are playing the version that has Ironcrag Feet, and that makes it a little bit more of a, I can land these two cards to get my Muxus out anytime I want to. But instead, this is just some straight aggro, and we're seeing lethal damage dealt by this trio of goblins. And I also just saw Seth with the oops on the emote wheel.
Yeah, I think he wanted to gust the Chieftain as opposed to the Snoop there. All things being honest, I don't really think it would matter. Yeah, all things being honest, I don't think it was really going to matter. I think Seth was kind of dead to rights there no matter what his draw step was going to be. Maybe he'd tell me differently, and he had, you know, I could have drawn this card to this card to this card if I would have ran perfect in one. But either way, here's what we know. It's going to game 3. Seth's on the play. That's where he wants to be against what is arguably the best deck in the format in Goblins.
I think usually what you see is people mixing up the Goblin Chieftain and the Goblin War Chief because they're both hasty Goblin Lords that have Chief in their name. I don't think I've ever seen the conspicuous Snoop confused before.
Well, Snoop Doggy Dogg was
Conspicuous
headed to the
Snoop, I
top of
want
the
to say.
library. Yeah.
Oh, Snoop, one of my favorite most recent addition to Goblins. I am a Krinko EDH player, and that card has been a joy to play with.
Well, I think there are a lot of people that are happy Conspicuous Snoop is a Magic card in existence right now. Mostly, I think most people playing Goblins are pretty happy about that. So,
I was going
and
to
I'm
say,
a Goblins
anybody who
fan
owns a
myself.
copy of Kiki Jiki, if you have a copy of Kiki Jiki, you probably love this card. And here comes the Zagath Triumph, leading out with a trio of mana types for Seth Manfield and a Dragon Skull Summit on the other side for Teo. And I'm looking at that hand. There is nothing under 3 CMC in Teo's hand.
Yeah, Teo's going to be off to a little bit of a slower start this game, but remember, Goblins can play early, can play middle, it can play late. It's obviously going to be playing more of a middle, trying to play a little bit more of a card advantage game this game because of Ringleader. Don't know what card Seth wants to take with this Thoughtseize. Could make an argument for the 3-mana spell. Could make an argument for any of these cards in hand right now.
Of course. So now we're going to see this decision get made. I like the choice there for Goblin Warchief. That's going to interrupt the game plan, really make it so there's nothing until turn 4 unless there's a good draw from the top of the deck.
And that is ideal for Seth for that to be the case because you can jump from 3 to 5 very easily here if your deck does cooperate. Uro's going to come down. Of course, we've seen this song and dance before, so now here comes the land. And ideally what's going to happen here for Seth is he draws a land next turn, he plays Nissa, has Gust up via the Zagath Triumph, and then life gets pretty easy. And hey, might as well fire off this Thoughtseize too for a little more interaction. So everything going Seth Manfield's way right now.
Yeah, that was a fantastic draw. Getting the Thoughtseize off the Uro, that has happened multiple times for Seth. I feel like maybe he's got a lucky touch.
Well, he did win a Pro Tour with a Sultai deck. Pro Tour Ixalan, he won with Sultai Energy, not this Sultai Uro deck. It would have been scary, I think, if the Energy deck had access to Uro and Growth Spiral. But that's a different conversation for a different time. That's a good draw there for Teo, and that is a less than ideal draw here for Seth. Really wanted land 5 for Nissa number 1.
Yep, did not get a land off Uro either. That was 2 draws where the land did not show up. So maybe that luck has run out. There's a chieftain now on the battlefield, able to give haste to any other creatures, but with 4 mana, that's only going to be 3 damage a turn and no other goblins coming down.
So that draw step there for Seth, Disdainful Stroke, that's actually a pretty nice one because right now he's stumbling and fumbling around. But the one thing that he knows is that I know my opponent has Muxus and Phyrexian Tower. So if Teo were to go Tower, sack my Chieftain for 2 black and then tap the other 4 for Muxus, that Disdainful Stroke takes care of that problem. Now, I don't think that's the play we're going to see because the draw of Thoughtseize means that you can kind of check out what's going on in your opponent's hand. But Disdainful Stroke kind of prevents the worst case scenario, at least for right now.
And it's good to have 2 different answers to Muxus in hand. We're going to see the Growth Spiral in response to the attack, an island coming down. Could this be an Aether Gust on the Chieftain, putting it back into hand?
I think I'd be a little bit surprised if I saw that. I don't think it's impossible because Seth may just want to convert these cards into actually doing something. His next turn is pretty rolled up, I would say. It's probably, I would say almost assuredly it's going to be Nissa, untap, make a 3/3, probably target the Zagath Triumph because it is favorable with Nissa to be able to leave up Stroke or Gust, depending on what his draw step is. So I don't know if he wants to fire off the Gust here. This activation of Embereth is going to bring Seth from 50 to 12, so I wouldn't say that his life total is in all that much trouble, but you got to remember, again, that Seth knows about the tower, Seth knows about the Muxus, so he knows that he has to prevent Muxus from entering the battlefield at basically any cost.
The damage has been dealt. I do like that Seth has gotten to 5 mana. Finally means that those Nissas are going to see some play. And we saw the Phyrexian Tower coming down. That is a interesting land. For people who have never seen it before, I'm sure you've seen it during these Goblin matchups, but it is not a card that was in Arena up until recently. Phyrexian Tower allows you to sacrifice a creature to generate 2 mana, or just tap for 1 colorless otherwise. It's also a legendary land, which means you can only have 1 of them out at a time. This has definitely tricked up a couple people who play 3 or 4 copies in their deck, and they've played it not realizing they would need to sacrifice 1.
Well, this is an interesting turn here for Teo. Actually, interesting turn for both sides. So Seth's plan here, as I mentioned last turn, was play Nissa, activate the Triumph, attack for 3. Your Triumph's going to tap for blue +1, which will be green because of the Nissa. Seth didn't gust last turn because if this scenario happened, which was my opponent leads with Thoughtseize into Muxus, I'm in a world of trouble. So Seth has up both of these cards here in Disdainful Stroke and Aether Gust, which means that Muxus is a no-go this turn with regards to resolution. What I expect to see happen is Thoughtseize is probably going to take the Stroke, which is the hard counter for the Muxus, leave your opponent with a Gust, and maybe you just try to cash in this turn and you say, you know what, I'll sacrifice my Chieftain for 2 black, I'll play the Blood Crypt untapped, play Muxus, and get it gusted. But it looks like we're going to go a different direction, which is leave the opponent with the Disdainful Stroke, which is still the hard counter for the Muxus. So I'm a little bit surprised by not taking the Stroke there and taking the Gust, Gust being a temporary answer, Stroke being a hard answer for Muxus here in this situation. A little bit of a surprising decision from Teo.
Yeah, I feel like having the opportunity to cast Muxus twice forces your opponent to have 2 different responses for it, rather than this attack right here, which I'm not entirely sure I understand, trying to get some chip damage down on on Nissa, and losing a Goblin Chieftain in the process. Having those haste enablers down before Muxus hits can be very, very helpful, because it means that if you whiff, you don't hit one, you still end up with Muxus having haste and anything else you hit having haste. So here is Uro escaping from the graveyard. Time for more life gain.
I am genuinely surprised by the decision making there from Teo Moutier, because now with Disdainful Stroke for you math folks out there, greater than sign Muxus, at least with my math. So now Seth is really going to play this game as though, okay, you know what? I'm never putting Disdainful Stroke down, which means your Muxus is never resolving. So you have to draw other stuff to win, and the other stuff that Goblins has, yeah, it's okay. But is it as good as Uro and Nissa when they're both going? For me, the answer is no. So I think the Teo's in some serious trouble now.
Yeah, you've got Nissa, who wins the game, and you've got Uro, one of the strongest cards that's come out in the last year.
And unless my eyes deceive me and my understanding of the format deceives me, which I don't think it does.
Nissas. Oh my! So the second Nissa just hit, because this is going to be 6 damage to the face. It is now a race. We're going to see this poor little Skirk Prospector trying to defend the board, and that Skirk Prospector will die to a Cry of the Carnarium next turn.
Yeah, now Cry will make Seth's creatures a little bit smaller, yes, but again, this is a situation now where had we gone to Muxus last turn, right? You take the Disdainful Stroke with the Thoughtseize, you cast Muxus last turn, it gets gusted. It's your draw step, of course, because you're going to gust it back to the top because it's the best card in your deck and the best card in the situation. This is getting stroked. We know it's getting stroked. It's countered, and now the game's over. I think he I think he outthought himself a little bit here.
Maybe we're seeing Nissa animate land. Are we going to see that Cry happen first? Nope, just going straight for the swing. And, a draw of an Aether Gust. Going to throw Skirk Prospector on top of the deck, to the bottom of the deck. And lethal damage is dealt. Teo taking a loss here, and Seth taking a win.
Game number 1 and 3 go to Seth Manfield, former world champion, getting the W. So congratulations to him.